What's up, everyone? This is Xavier, your host, and welcome to the 210 Stockyard.
There are 2 weeks left in the 2023 XFL season, and after 8 weeks, we know 3 things about the San Antonio Brahmas. 1. Our defense is capable of keeping us in games and making big plays when needed. 2. Our offense still needs a lot of work. 3. Despite the carousel of quarterbacks coming in and out, and despite the questionable play calling, we're still in the playoff hunt. Now, a lot needs to happen around the league to help us, but ultimately, we need to win out the last 2 games of the season, and it starts with Orlando. So stay tuned as I lay out a map for what needs to happen in order to see the Brahmas in the playoffs. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content, tell all your friends, and don't be afraid to tell me what you think in the comments. Sunday's overtime loss to Houston was heartbreaking, but it did show that the Brahmas are that much closer to being able to close out games. Now, quarterback is obviously still a concern, as well as our O-line. And if you didn't know, because I didn't know, Jack Cohn dislocated his pinky during the game. Me, being at the game, I don't actually know this or see this, when you're there live. I had to wait till I got home to find out. But the loss was still an improvement in my eyes. We held Houston to 15 points during regulation. And in fact, most of the teams that we've played have had season scoring lows against us. So simply put, we're hard to score on. Yes, we have a bad record. But for anyone paying attention, you can't really blame the defense or special teams. And I wish I could say that us having home field is an advantage, but it just hasn't been a factor as we have yet to win our first home game. But all that can change this Saturday against Orlando. Now, I'm honestly anxious for this matchup. The Guardians are coming off a disappointing 2-point loss to Arlington, and Orlando's quarterback Quentin Dormady had a terrible game. He threw 2 picks, had 3 fumbles, and was sacked 4 times in that game. And now this game is scary because I can't predict how they're going to respond. I can't predict how Quentin Dormady is going to respond. Will he show up the same way he showed up against DC? Or will he revert back to the quarterback that we just saw play against Arlington? Orlando is already eliminated from playoff contention, so will they have the heart to play for pride? Now, this by no means is a sure win for us, and I doubt the Brahmas see this as a trap game. I'm anticipating a hard-fought game on both sides. And now let's not forget that we have Paxton Lynch now. So do we get to see him in a series? And if so, does he torch his former team? It happens. I honestly feel like every player in this game on both sides will be playing with a really big chip on their shoulders. This is basically a playoff game for San Antonio. I see this game as a potential powder keg, and I am ready to see the sparks fly on Saturday. So assuming San Antonio wins on Saturday, here's what needs to happen around the league in order for us to stay in the playoff hunt. So here are the current standings. DC and Houston have clinched playoff spots, but neither of them have clinched the home field advantage yet. Vegas and Orlando have already been mathematically eliminated, and that leaves St. Louis and Seattle fighting for the last spot in the north, and San Antonio and Arlington battling for the last spot in the south. The first game next week is Saturday. It's Houston versus Vegas. It's a home game for the Roughnecks, but being that they've already clinched a playoff spot and Vegas is eliminated, I can see Houston letting off the gas and allowing Vegas to upset them in what I suspect will be a trap game. Now, this game doesn't have a direct effect on the Brahmas' playoff hopes, but I am still predicting that Vegas will get the W and will leave Houston 5-4 going into Week 10. And it'll leave Vegas, while still eliminated, it at least puts them at 3-6 on the season. Next up, San Antonio at home against Orlando. Now, I won't build the hype for this any further. I'm just saying San Antonio wins and they move on to 3-6 on the season. Orlando goes down to 1-8 and they remain eliminated. Sunday's first game is Arlington at DC. It's the Defenders' last home game, and it looks like they're about to have a sold-out stadium. So beer snakes all day for everyone. So even without the help of a sold-out crowd, I don't see DC losing to Arlington in this game in any scenario. even with Arlington now having Luis Perez at quarterback. I think he's good. I don't think he's good enough to make a difference in this game. And even with DC clinching a playoff spot, they are still playing for home field advantage. And again, this is their last home game. The crowd's going to be rowdy. Yeah, if I could bet on the outcome of only one game this upcoming weekend, it's definitely going to be this game. And I'm definitely betting that DC wins against Arlington. So Arlington will drop to 4-5 going into week 10, and DC goes into the final game against San Antonio at 8-1. Now this needs to happen for obvious reasons, that Arlington needs to lose out for San Antonio to stay alive. But it honestly also sets up a relaxed DC Defenders team going into week 10 against San Antonio, and I'll explain how and why that's important in just a second. Now the final game in week 9 is Seattle at St. Louis. This is pretty much a playoff game. This is the perfect headliner game for a Sunday night. I am actually really excited for this one. I'm predicting a high scoring game. I'm definitely taking the over on what should be a barn burner. We have the top 2 quarterbacks in the XFL going head to head. It's in St. Louis, so you can count on the fans being there and being hyped, being ready. AJ McCarron is returning from his injury. He's going to be hyped and ready. And remember, he's playing for his sons, for his family. You know, it's a real touching story. I love it. And as much as I like his story, and as much as I love his passion for the game, I still, unfortunately, and even though it's in St. Louis, I'm picking Seattle to win. Ben DiNucci is the league's passing leader, and he has way too many weapons at his disposal. 1 through 4 or 5 on the depth chart, you can pick any one of his receivers, and they're all going to give you fantasy points if you're playing fantasy. Not to mention they just picked up Lindsey. I think he's going to have a good game against St. Louis. And so when it's all said and done, I'm saying that Seattle will win, and we need them to win. This will leave both Seattle and St. Louis at 6-3 heading into week 10. Now, more importantly, this is why we need Seattle to win, because with a Seattle win and a St. Louis loss, DC can now clinch, or has now clinched, or will have clinched home field advantage. And that sets up my perfect scenario for the Brahmas to make a playoff run. So if week 9 plays out the way that I hope it does, and I'm predicting it does, then that'll leave week 10 to look like this. So the first matchup in week 10 is going to be Orlando at St. Louis. I'm not going to say that St. Louis is a sure win on this, even though they're playing at home. It's their last home game, and again, their fans are crazy. I do think Orlando, despite their record, is a very dangerous team, and they can show up at any moment. But for prediction's sake, I'm just going to go ahead and say that St. Louis wins their final game at home. They end the season at 7-3. Orlando ends like how I predicted at the beginning of the season, with the worst record of a 1-9. Now the second game on Saturday is going to be our game against DC. If week 9 played out the way that I hope it does, and DC ends up winning home field advantage for the North, then it is my belief and honestly hope that DC will kind of take the day off against San Antonio. Having already solidified their playoff spot and the home field advantage, there's really nothing for them to play for at this point. I can see them resting their starters or resting their better players, which should give San Antonio the advantage against them on the final game. So assuming all that happens and we pull out the victory, San Antonio will end the season at 4-6 and DC will drop down to 8-2, but it doesn't change anything for them. Sunday's game. This is what really, even if everything, falls into place the way I hope it does, this is the game that can really hurt us. If Arlington beats Houston, then we're out. If Houston beats Arlington, then we're in. Now all this is honestly dependent on Houston, because at this point in week 10, again assuming everything in week 9 happens the way it needs to happen, Houston can pretty much decide who they want to play in the playoffs. If Houston beats Arlington, they will be playing against the San Antonio Brahmas in the playoffs. If they don't want to face us, all they have to do is pretty much let Arlington win, which sets up a rematch for them in the playoffs. The only difference is the Week 10 game is going to be played in Arlington. The playoff game will be played in Houston. Now, me personally, I think Houston would have an easier time playing against Arlington back-to-back games. They did struggle both times they played us, even though they won. I do think they realized we are the better defensive team, but with our struggles at quarterback and the O-line, we might look like a more favorable opponent to them. So it really just comes down to the Houston and Arlington game in Week 10 to decide, who's going to play Houston in the playoffs. But let's just stick with my scenario. Houston wins, they end the season at 6-4. Arlington drops down to 4-6. And then the final game of Week 10 is going to be Vegas against Seattle. I don't see Vegas putting up much of a fight, especially at Seattle against the Seattle team that at this point will probably still be fighting for that final playoff spot in the North. It'll be a must-win game for Seattle. So, assuming that they win, Seattle ends the season at 7-3, Vegas ends it at 3-7. So when it's all said and done, this is what I predict it'll look like. So in the North, St. Louis and Seattle will both have a 7-3 record, and it's pretty much up to the XFL tiebreaker rules to determine who's going to take the final playoff spot. And again, that is also dependent on how the victories and losses of each team plays out. Now on the South, San Antonio and Arlington will both finish at 4-6. And if we look at the XFL tiebreaker rules, by reading this, San Antonio should take that final spot and play Houston in the playoffs. We beat Arlington, we split the head-to-head with Arlington, but we beat them by more points than they beat us. So if they don't take that into account on the first step and you look at the second step, it's based off of the win and loss percentage within division games. And Houston and San Antonio will pretty much have the exact same win-loss percentage within the division. Both teams having beaten Orlando twice, both teams losing to Houston twice, and then of course we split the head-to-head. So that's probably the second step is just the wash. But then when you go to step 3, the strength of victory in all games by the combined record of the opponent wins. And if San Antonio beats out DC, and again, if it all plays out the way I hope it does, then that gives San Antonio the decision between that. That's going to give us that deciding factor in the tie. Now I'll leave the rules up. If you guys want to read them on your own, you can. But if we're looking at the rules as they're laid out, I don't see how San Antonio does not claim the second playoff spot for the North. Yes, it is dependent on other teams winning and losing as well, but ultimately we just need to take care of business. I am very excited. I am very anxious for this upcoming game. Matter of fact, I'm about to head out right now to go shopping for all my supplies for the tailgate. I will be there. I will be there early. Stop by and say hi. As always, thank you so much for listening to me rant and ramble. I do appreciate it. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content. Let me know what you guys think. Can we navigate this 2-week roadmap that I've laid out? Will we see the Brahmas in the playoffs? Oh, jerseys are on sale today, by the way, as well. See if I pick one up. But thanks again for listening, and as always, horns forward.